Sawadee krap. So I want to say good morning to Kun Rame, Kun Araya, as well as Kun Apisit, as well as to all the colleagues, the management and staff of OKMD, especially to Kun Apichat, Kun Mon as well, actually Kun Chan and Kun Tin, who had been very kindly helping to facilitate this presentation. And this is really a big honor and privilege for me, not only to share, but also to learn from all of you. So my presentation will focus on a few dimensions. So I will talk about the global trends, and then after that, I will look at what's next, using an example, and also looking at how. So this will be the structure of my presentation. And my purpose is also that I hope through the session, it can inspire you further. In fact, all of you are already very successful in what you do, but I always learn from my guru, Professor Philip Kotler, that there is never an end to learning. Even at the age of 83, he is still learning today. So I hope the talk will help to lead to further inspiration. So the title of the talk, and I want to congratulate the organizers. To me, I think that this is a very important topic indeed. In fact, a lot of places around the world people that I meet from different parts of the world, they do recognize this importance. And when we talk about future business opportunities, it actually lies in looking at what are the future trends. So I wish to congratulate the organizers for coming up with a very, very suitable topic. So my talk first focus on global trends, and then the next part will be what's next. When we look at global trends, there are always some words of wisdom to me that we can learn from. So according to Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric, when the rate of external change exceeds the rate of internal change, the end is near. Now, I know that in our audience, and I'm really heartened, we have an audience of really good diversity, different age groups, different gender. And that shows one thing, that entrepreneurship has no barriers. No matter what is your age, no matter what is your gender. In fact, I would also say no matter what is your occupation. I always argue that entrepreneurship is not for entrepreneurs alone. Entrepreneurship is developing an enterprising mindset. Whether you are a government officer, whether you are working for a charity, whether you are working for an NGO, developing the enterprising mindset is an asset for life. So Jack Welch says when the rate of external change exceeds the rate of internal change, the end is near. Let me ask you, just by a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Olivetti? Wow. No hands. Oh, so thank you. Some hands. Otherwise, I feel a generation gap. Because once upon a time, if you were to tell somebody that Olivetti will go out of business, they will think that you are mad. They will think that you are crazy. It's almost like today, if somebody were to tell you that IBM will go out of business, you will think that is impossible. If somebody were to tell you today that Google will go out of business, you will say, how can that be? I just use as an example, and by the way, whenever I use any examples, it's not because I'm angry with certain companies, or it's not because I have a shareholding in that company. So let me declare I do not have any vested interest, no shareholdings and so on in any company that I happen to mention. So Olivetti, as we all know, or for those who know, they were the number one when it comes to making a typewriter. But today, you will be so surprised if you see somebody having a typewriter. Tomorrow, somebody will be very surprised, for example, to see that you have a mainframe, a desktop computer. How many of you have a desktop computer? Wow! Keep it. Treasure it. The value will go up. In 10 years' time, it will be antique value. So that just shows the rate of changes that are happening. Believe me. Today, people will want to have laptop instead of a desktop. Tomorrow, people will want to have a mobile phone instead of the laptop. And soon, the keyboard will disappear. The next generation will be wondering what is that when they see a keyboard, when you can input everything in by talking instead of keying in. So when we look at the future trends, so one question that we always will need to ask ourselves is, what are the changes in the environment? To help us to understand that, I just use a framework, but don't worry, this is not a talk for academics. It's actually based on a book that happened to co-author together with Philip Kotler. I learned from all the others, so I'm the only one. My picture is there because I do photocopying for them. Okay, so this book is in Thai as well, and recently we came out also with this book, which is also translated into Thai language as well. Okay, so the reason why I mentioned about this framework, because this is the framework that I will use for the talk. So when we talk about what are the future trends, we are really talking about what are the changes in the environment. For any business that we are in, we must always assess the outlook. We must always ask ourselves, who are our customers? Have they changed? We cannot assume that we have the same customers all the time. Our customers do change. We also need to ask ourselves, who are our competitors? Because our competitors are trying to provide a value, to supply a value better than us to our customers. We always have to ask ourselves, what are our strengths and weaknesses? Because we are the value decider. And apart from customers, competitors, and ourselves, we also need to ask, what are the changes in the environment? That's why in the model we have the word change, because changes in the environment shifts value, shifts the value that customers want. That's why we call it value migrator. And what are the changes in the environment? This is one of the latest books that has been published. And in this book, it has been identified that there are 4 global forces breaking all the trends. But always bear in mind, in my own opinion, there isn't one book that is perfect, that is comprehensive, covers everything. So it's always good to learn from different sources of information. So in this book, No Ordinary Disruption, I'm not a co-author of this book, but very interestingly, to see what are the forces of change that the authors have identified. So they mentioned the age of urbanization, technological changes, aging world, as well as greater global connections. My talk uses a framework. I must acknowledge it was developed by Philip Kotler. To me, it is a simple framework, but pretty comprehensive. So if we want to see what are the changes in the business landscape, there are many. It will be almost impossible to think about it just roughly. So having a framework will help us. So there are 6 items here. So let me talk about each one of them just to highlight what are some of the changes happening. This is by no means every change that is happening. So if we look at it from a demographic point of view, for example, the world's population is growing. And it will still continue to grow. It will still continue to grow. By 2050, projected is 9.3 billion. So, as entrepreneurs, the challenge to us is, what are the implications of these changes? What are the business opportunities that can arise from these future trends? So, just an implication is water. There will be a shortage of water. In fact, in some countries, there are already shortages in water. So in 2000, it is forecast that 1/3 of the world population would be affected by water scarcity. And just from this alone, lots of implications, maybe even business opportunities. Just an example, China has 22% of the world's population, but only 8% of its fresh water, which means then that they will need to have a lot of engineering projects to help them to meet their water needs. And this is estimated to be worth more than $200 billion. That's why I always tell all my engineering colleagues in my university, which happens to have the largest engineering college in the whole world, that they have a very bright future. And when we look at this, I just use as an example one company, and this company was founded by a lady. When we talk about womenomics, just an example. I remember when I first met her more than 20 years ago, she was starting just very small, just only 1-2 people. She had hardly any resources. But today, she has done so well that she was given the Entrepreneurship Woman of the Year, Entrepreneur of the Year for the whole world. Listed company, highly, highly successful. She has identified the right business opportunity to go into. So the world's population will be growing, and GE takes into account of all this. Always do bear in mind, it doesn't mean that opportunities only exist for big companies. High Flux started very, very small. Small business, 2-3 people, but it has grown to become very successful. Another trend, aging society. Can you read this? If you cannot read this, I don't worry too much for you. But if you cannot find what is the number, then you have joined my world. It's an aging society. Not every country. Some countries are still young population. Vietnam, India, Indonesia, these are countries with young populations. But in some countries, it's really aging. South Korea is an example. Japan is another good example of a country with an aging population. And if you allow me to use Singapore as an example, it is fast aging. Fast aging. Singaporeans are dying out. And why do we say dying out? Because for every 8 that die, only 5 are born. The reproduction rate is less than 1.2. 2 parents, and if your reproduction rate is less than 1.2, it will mean that there will not be enough. So a recent newspaper said, 2014, 5.2 young people support a population where the people are 65 years or over. By 2030, the statistics would have declined to 2.1. So these are very stark realities about an aging society. And aging will change the demand for many products and services. So examples, and these are areas of possible business opportunities. I use China as an example. So China's population is aging. Its healthcare system needs more facilities. But China is getting rich fast. So hospitals and other healthcare facilities are set to be huge businesses. And here, if I may mention, some of the best hospitals in the world are none other than Thai hospitals. That's why in our book, we use the example of Bangkok Hospital just as an example. Bumrungrad is also another very good example. So developed countries tend to spend around 10% of their GDP. Assuming that by 2013, China spends just 8% instead of 10%, What does it mean? This will amount to an economic sector worth over $1 trillion. Hospitals will be big businesses. So too will be those in the pharmaceutical area, ancillary services, medical waste management, equipment for the old and the elderly, okay, and including cemeteries and columbariums, right? In fact, some of the most expensive property are the columbariums. Per square foot can cost so much. If you don't believe that the society, some societies can be really aging, in countries, for example, with good healthcare systems, let me ask you, just make a guess, by the year 2050, what do you think how old a person can live up to? It was in Bangkok, maybe some 10 years ago, when I listened to a forum, and the speaker, his name is called Urban Lanner. He's the editor of the Asian Wall Street Journal. He showed one cartoon, and in the cartoon, the year 2050, it shows a motorcyclist carrying a pillion rider, and this motorcyclist was booked for a traffic offense by a traffic policeman. The year 2050. When the traffic policeman recorded the age of the motorcyclist, 95. And the pillion rider, his mother, 125. And the policeman himself, 105 years old. And the traffic offense, speeding. According to Urban Lanner, by the year 2050, people can live until 125 years old. Now, I was sitting there, I cannot believe it. But he quoted the United Nations Human Genome Study to show that it is very possible. So, if you don't believe it, so like for example, in 1950, in many countries, people die before they reach the age of 60 years old. And you will remember that maybe for some people, anyway, at least for me, I have celebrated some relatives' birthdays because when they reach 60 years old, it calls for a big birthday celebration that this person can live up to the 60 years old. Wow, it calls for celebrations. In the future, today, if you have a close relative who died at the age of 60 years old, you will say, what a pity, he died so young. Tomorrow, when your relative died at the age of 100 years old, you will also have the same sentiment. What a pity, he died so young at 100 years old. So is it true? Let's look at this. Today with medical advances, you can change your pancreas, you can change your liver. Tomorrow you can change many things. You can change your eyeball, you can change your kidney, you can change almost everything. The only problem you have is, what brand should I buy? If I want to change my liver, if I want to change my kidney, because a lot of these artificial items, medical equipment will be there. So this person, 100 years ago, nobody will expect somebody to live to be 100 years old and still complete a marathon. Okay. Today, this 100-year-old lady, she still dances in music videos. And I'm going to show you the next slide. You will not believe it, but it's not from me. It was reported in the newspapers. In 30 years, women may even give birth at the age of 100. Hard to believe. But the way things are advancing, you know, 100 years ago, if you were to tell the people 100 years ago that one fine day there will be an MRT, they will never believe that there would ever be such a thing. Because 100 years ago, to travel for 2 kilometers could take them easily more than, 1 hour, 2 hours. Today, 2 kilometers by tuk-tuk or by car, just in minutes. So, we do have a life cycle. We have to recognize that we have a life cycle. Products have a life cycle, but human beings also have a life cycle. Just like a product, we have 4 stages of a life cycle. The first stage of our life cycle is we believe in Santa Claus. Second stage of our life cycle as we grow, we no longer believe in Santa Claus. The third stage, when we grow even older, we are Santa Claus. And then finally, when we come to the last stage of our life, we look like Santa Claus. We will age. Unless one fine day there is such a strong medical advance that can prevent a person from aging. I'm not ruling that out. But until that happens, a lot of societies will age. And GE, very clever. They recognize that aging populations. So what does that mean? Healthcare GE money and NBC television channels are some of the businesses that Jeff Immelt from GE anticipate will grow. I do teach GE. I was surprised. I asked the managers, I can understand for an aging society, healthcare is important, money is important, but why television channels? The answer was very simple. What do you do at night when you are 90 years old? It will be a very, very big business.